Hi there, everyone. It's Mark Stutman coming to you from Folkway Music here in Ontario, Canada. Hope you're all doing well. Happy 2025. I had a friend of mine, another luthier out in France. He emailed me and was asking me about a 70s D-35 he was working on and the bridge plate. He wanted to change the bridge plate and hot rod the guitar for a customer who wanted his guitar to sound better. And it brought to mind that I have not yet done a video on 70s Martins, particularly the 70s D-35s that are out there in the world, and about their bridge plates, about their top thickness, about the braces, about the pros and cons to removing the large bridge plate that was used in Martin guitars in the 70s, early 80s, and maybe we'll touch upon a couple other things that 70s Martins are famous for, but I want to talk in particular about a D-35, 70s D-35 in particular. We see a lot of these guitars. It was Martin's best-selling Dreadnought in the mid-70s. It took over from the D-28, as Martin kind of hoped, I guess. The D-35 was designed to sound different than a D-28 in an era when Martin wasn't making a pre-war style guitar. There was demand for guitars to sound more bassy and warm and great for sort of vocal accompaniment rather than powerful lead guitars. And so Martin came up with the D-35. Part of it was because they wanted to use this three-piece back to make use of these smaller pieces of Brazilian rosewood they still had left over in the mid-60s. That was A. And B, in an effort to make the guitars sound warmer, Martin changed the top bracing slightly on a D-35. Here's just a rando Martin guitar top. This is a sort of normal scallop brace. Martin, the braces measure 5/16 of an inch wide across. On a D-35, these braces measure 1/4 of an inch across, not 5/16. And 20% less material of a brace is going to affect the sound of the guitar. The top is going to move a lot differently. Anyways, so Martin did that. The tops were moving around more. They had more bass. And then in the later 60s, 67 or so, 68, Martin decided to change the bridge plate in their guitar from something that was this size to something that was this size and rosewood. Very different size things, as you can see right here. And all their guitars, 68 on until 85, had this big rosewood bridge plate. And the ones prior, 67, 6, and before, had this size plate. Earlier guitars even had a smaller plate, but they did move around with the X-brace position and angle. Anyways, when they went to this big bridge plate, the people at Martin knew that this large bridge plate would change the sound of the guitar. They had been building guitars at that point for, 150 years, and they were very well aware that if you put a big, stiff, huge piece of rosewood inside your guitar, the top would move differently and the sound of the guitar would change. Now, a lot of people, myself included, for many years would take these bridge plates out of guitars and replace them with bridge plates this size, and our guitars would sound better. It's just a thing that happened. You put a smaller bridge plate in, the guitar does sound better, it's true. But what we weren't doing was giving any account to the fact that Martin might have designed the top around a big bridge plate like this, as Gibson did also in the 60s when they had big bridge plates. The Martins from the 1970s, if you measure the top thickness of those guitars with any one of a number of top thickness measurement tools that you might have if you do this job, the tops from the 1970s on Dreadnoughts generally measure about 20 thousandths of an inch thinner than the tops from the 50s and 60s and the tops from after the 70s into the 80s, 90s, and today. So a D-35 like this one that I'm holding right here, this late 70s Sunburst D-35, lovely guitar. It has its original huge bridge plate in it. The top on this guitar measures 105 thousandths of an inch. 105. That's about the same thickness as a 19 30 OM28. It's the same thickness as my 33 L00 that sounds like $1 million. Those are smaller guitars than a Dreadnought. Dreadnought spec is thicker. A normal Dreadnought top is 115 to 125. Some are even thicker than that. You measure a new Collings, it's 135. A lot of Gibson slope shoulders are 135, 145. For the bigger top of a guitar and the power that you hit Dreadnoughts with, you need to have more top thickness. So Martin kind of saw this bridge plate, I think, as sort of a substitute for top thickness, and then decided to thin the rest of the top out to offset whatever changes in tone that big bridge plate was making. So thinner top, bigger bridge plate, end result, a guitar that still sounds great and has the structural integrity around the bridge that it needs. When you go changing this bridge plate out for a smaller bridge, you're introducing, aside from sort of the trauma the guitar suffers when you take its bridge and bridge plate out, or can suffer, you're changing the geometry of everything. You're changing the way the string energy is pulling on the strings are pulling on the top. You're changing the way the bridge is torquing. You're changing the support behind the bridge. And as a result, when you do that job to a 70s Martin, frequently you'll find that the top really develops bulging issues behind the wings, where that's where the most sort of upward force is happening. It's right against the X brace that just isn't letting the top move. So you get these little bumps that happen back here that show you, hey, I'm a thin top and I've had some troubles. The other thing that happens is normally you use heat to take a bridge off or a bridge plate out. A lot of the time, heat, water in the case of a bridge plate, but often heat as well. And what happens is that, I'll grab this top. What happens is that the X brace adjacent to the bridge plate often becomes loose from the top because of the heat that you're using and moisture that you're using to take this part out. And that's something that people don't often think to address after they've done bridge or bridge plate surgery to a guitar. You have to really check that the glue joint hasn't been compromised between the X brace and the top. And it might not look compromised, but if you get under there with a feeler gauge, you'll often discover that there is a gap that you don't even see with a mirror. So you need to glue that too. And a lot of times I see guitars that have had bridge reglues or bridge plate replacements, and now the X brace is separated from the top, which is exacerbating the bulges that happen right over here. The other thing that happens when you take a bridge plate out of a guitar is you can hurt the guitar top in the process. Just if the grain has a lot of run out and you can't get at it on the one side, it's possible to do a lot of damage to the inside of a guitar. So elective bridge plate surgery is not a great idea, all in all. You can see this has been taped back together and it's all cracked. It's because it was hard to get out. The other ones I've got here, here's a bit of top damage that happened from this one. Here's another one, it's all sort of cracked and falling apart. They're hard to get out. These are 20, 25 years ago, these guys. I don't do them any longer unless I absolutely have to because of what I've learned about top thickness and such. So it's not a great idea to take this plate out of the guitar and put this plate in. Oftentimes the damage that you're causing is much worse than the improvement in tone that you're creating. So I want that to get known. I want luthiers around the world to know, even if they've not measured top thicknesses on these 70s guitars, that they should start. And a 70s D-35, 70s D-28, 70s anything, they're 50-year-old guitars now. They sound pretty darn good. And if you have one like this that's in great shape and original, it's a vintage guitar at this point. It's collectible, and you don't want to be messing with stuff unless you really have to. There are other issues with 70s guitars that make them a little less desirable than 60s guitars beyond that bridge plate. The bridges were often mislocated too far that way, and so they play sharp, and you have to do fancy stuff with the saddle placement to get them to work. D-35s in particular are famous for binding, letting go. This one's doing pretty good. Anyways, but that's not the point of this video. It's mostly about let's leave our bridge plates in our 70s Martins and not mess with them. By extension, leave the popsicle brace in your guitars too. It's not a good idea. That causes other structural problems when you start taking popsicle braces out of a guitar. Martin knew what they were doing in the 70s. They made some changes that by our standards today, in hindsight, were not quote-unquote good, but where they were at the time with their building, they made perfect sense. And the number of 70s guitars that are still on Earth today, sounding great, playing great, maybe a little out of tune, but otherwise structurally great, goes to show that things worked together as a system, and they did it really well. Anyways, that's 70s Martins and bridge plates. Hopefully there's some new information there for you, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Thanks very much. Take care.